I have no idea what happened right now that we actually don't have no clue what happened. All I can say is that thanks for coming back. I just think it's Mercury retrograde and nothing's really working for us. Let me see if I can bring Alicia back to see if she's still here. Yeah, thank you. Thanks, everyone. I really don't know what happened. I'm going to blame it on Mercury retrograde. Let's see if I can bring Alicia back. Because we did want to finish that conversation. And we did have. Okay, Mercury's in retrograde. I know. Let's see. Hopefully, if Alicia can come back on. And if not, it'll just be me. But y'all are here. Thanks. And there were a couple of questions that I really did want to get to. Okay. Aha. Okay, let's see. I think we've got Alicia. We're waiting for Alicia. There. Oh
Hi,
my
I'm
God.
back.
It is total Mercury retrograde.
We were just talking about this, about how Mercury is really messing with us right now, and clearly.
I am actually, that was unbelievable. It's like we brought Mercury retrograde into our energy because we were talking about it earlier.
Yep.
And you're like, sometimes you cut off a little bit for me, and that too is Mercury retrograde.
Absolutely. Let's just blame everything.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
we're gonna blame it on that. We really appreciate that people are coming back. Thank you. I totally didn't expect anyone to return.
Yeah. But here we are.
We're gonna. IG usually allows 30 minutes for live. Was that so? Because I went like a little bit longer last time. Maybe that's what it is. Okay.
Oh. Okay.
Oh, that's so weird. I didn't know that. Okay. So thanks for coming back. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
And I apologize for the abrupt sort of, whatever. And for those of you who are joining, we already blamed it on Mercury retrograde. So, Alicia, I think the question that was up on the screen, and I don't know if that person is still here, was this question around weavers and whether, who are weavers and why are they so important? And I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that as well, because I think that weavers do get a little bit, like we don't actually see them much, but they exist in our movements. And so, and as I'm sort of explaining this a little bit, if folks have any more questions, or if you actually want to share with us who you are in terms of those roles, feel free. I don't know, 60 minutes, 30 minutes. It's probably something on my end. I have no idea what happened. So I was quickly going to say that a weaver is actually somebody who sees the through lines between movements, between people, between ideas, right? And so, for example, a weaver is someone who can look at a particular issue. So because we've been talking so much about what's happening right now, it could be abolition of the police or prisons, right? And then make the connection to a movement to abolish ICE, right? Could make a connection back to what were the demands of the Black Panther Party, right? So really being able to make these connections and see the through lines between across history, across ideas, across movements, to say that, you know what, this is not an isolated, right? This is not the first time we're talking about this. This is not isolated, right? It's actually more connected. So wondering if you have thoughts on weavers, and how do you see them showing up in the movement spaces you're in?
Yeah, I think you just named that example is such a great one between like policing and ICE, and like I think that weavers, when we talk about concepts of intersectionality, right, of really being able to see how all of these issues, movements, questions are deeply interconnected to one another, right? So I think about particularly the way that survivors in this moment, survivors of sexual assault, domestic violence, and child sexual abuse, are talking about abolition, right? And are saying, actually, policing does not keep us safe, right? And so we are with the demands for abolition. We are with the demands of an end to policing and an end to the carceral state, because the state is an actor of violence. When we think about the violence that happens within the prison system, when we think about the violence, the gendered violence in particular, that police can inflict on women of color, on queer and trans folks of color, on folks within detention centers, right? And so I think that those weavers are the people that can really make the connections between movements. I think that weavers too, it feels really like connected to story. This may or may not be true. I'm just offering an opinion here, that weavers feel really connected to storytellers, right? Because what they can also do is connect stories between movements and between spaces. And I think what weavers allow us to do is be in deeper solidarity with one another. When we understand our work as connected, when we understand our struggles as connected, we show up for each other really differently. And I think that the weaver in the space gives us an invitation to do that. And I think that there's a lot of, a lot of roles that we may call like hidden. I mean, roles are only hidden to people who aren't like paying attention, I think. But I do think that weaver is like this very important undercurrent role that is actually drawing the connections. And also, like, I consider it like connective tissue, right? That sounds kind of gross and scientific.
Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah.
But like really making connections between people too. So many of the spaces that I've been in, so many of the doors that have opened, so many ways that we bring other people along happens through weavers. Right? Through weavers making connections, connecting us to resources, connecting us to people with things that we need, right? Weavers are actually really important. I didn't realize how passionate I was about weavers until this very moment. I'm like, weavers, yes, go you.
Yeah, I find, I definitely find this concept of weaving to be very important. It is the, the connective tissue. It is the transitioning, right? And it's important because oftentimes I think in our work, we can feel very isolated, and we think that it's the first time anything has been done before, or there's no other way to connect it, right? We work in silos, and so I think that weavers are folks who take us out of our silos. And I love the idea that you mentioned, that you brought up the word solidarity. They are folks who actually help us align around solidarity too. So someone just said, I never considered myself a weaver until now. Yeah, that's great. Yay to like my cilia. Oh, I love that. That's great. Yeah, the connections are that's great. So we have another question that's come up. How do you recommend moving forward as a caregiver among other roles? And I don't know the rest because for some reason it doesn't allow me to read the whole thing. I'm not sure why. And Angela, I didn't see your question, so you might want to pull it up one more time or put it in again. So how do you recommend moving forward as a caregiver among other roles? Yeah. Wow. I think what you said, Alicia, has now so many more weavers are calling themselves into.
Yes. Yes. Weave. Babies weave. It's so like deeply like spiritual and ancestral too, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like I think about the actual practice of weaving, right? Like what does it look like? What does it feel like? It's a real thing. It's really important. Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
So with caregivers, weavers are rice. Yeah. With caregivers, how do you recommend moving forward as a caregiver? I think that one of the things I would say, and then Alicia, I'd love to hear your thoughts, is really also, again, to think about your capacity. And that's another part of the reflection questions, right? What is it that if you've decided that you want to kind of play another role, right? Or stretch into another role, and caregiving is one of them. What is your capacity, right, to do that? And what are your boundaries? to do that, because I think it is important when we think about balance, right, to also think about boundaries.
Yes.
And so I really recommend asking those questions, and again, doing that reflection internally. I also think that caregivers can be helpful it can be helpful to even identify to whom you want to care for, right? So one of the things I've tried to do is recognizing my own limits of capacity, because I care for a child, my child. So I know that that's like a very significant part of my caregiving. And so when I think about moving that into other spaces, I recognize that my capacity is limited. And so then what I do is I have identified, okay, you know what? I want to be a caregiver to like a group of 5 women who are on the front lines of work in South Asian, Muslim, and Arab communities, because that's kind of my home and where I came from. And so I want to provide that care for women who are doing that now, right? So I've kind of just decided that and try to focus in. So I'll send, I'll reach out, I'll do texts, I'll send cards, whatever it is to show that I care in that way or to support them. So that's just some ideas around both that looks at boundaries and capacity, but also the other spaces, the other ecosystems where you might be playing a pretty significant caregiving role, and understanding that you don't want to stretch yourself too thin. What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, totally. I feel like for me, I am a caregiver often in my like personal relationships, and maybe that doesn't show up so much in the same way at work. I don't know, there's quite a few people on here who've worked with me, so y'all can say whether that's true or not. But I certainly feel like in my personal relationships, I really take on a caregiver role, and often then don't have the capacity to do it anywhere else. And so I have to be honest about where my boundaries lie, when I feel depleted. And then I think you said something earlier, Deepa, about just like accepting support, right? And so one of the other practices is around like, how do I also accept care and nurturance when it shows up in my space? And I think so much about the connection between caregivers and healers, and like healing justice as a frame and modality for our work. And how important nurturance is for our movements and all of the spaces that we're in. And so my practice is both like being a caregiver in some spaces and also learning how to receive care in other spaces. Yeah.
That's so true. And I love that, we did say the theme here was ecosystems, and a lot of your questions are related to that. So this one question coming up, and then I saw another one that I'll pick up, is how can I use this if I'm currently working on my own? Yeah. And so, so many of us do work on our own, right? But as I've said before, these roles are not necessarily about your job or your job title, right? They're about the skills that you're bringing into space, the presence that you have, and how you're kind of in service to what is in the middle circle, the values, the purpose, the goals, right? And so I would suggest maybe thinking about broadening your ecosystem from outside of your workplace. So if you're mapping it out and you're like, well, I'm working on my own, right? And there aren't other people in the workplace, think about going broader, right? Perhaps your community, your online network, your mentors, the people that you learn from, the people that you guide, so just get a little bit more creative about what that ecosystem is, so that it's not specifically just your workplace. The only thing I'd say is that you want to identify folks who are also connected to the values in the middle circle, or who are working in the same context that you are, right? So that's what I'd say to that one.
Yeah, I would add too that like Mia Mingus in the Bay Area Transformative Justice Collective has this really good pod mapping that allows you to think about yourself in an ecosystem. So it's not necessarily about the roles that you play, but about who is in your ecosystem. So I think that what could be really important as a first step before, well, you can also figure your role out, just like what feels right in this moment. But I think what's also really important is understanding where you are and who is in your network, who's in your pod, who's in your ecosystem. And then it might that might make it easier to expand, to figure out like what roles you play within these different ecosystems. And of course, like we've already talked about, like you can have multiple ecosystems. It could be your faith community, it could be your family, it could be your friend group, it could be a collective of other, I have been an ED And I'm more than once have been the only full-time staff at an organization, right?
Yeah.
And so in volunteers and
I
board members.
totally resonate with that.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
um, and there's a network of other EDs
Yeah.
and to connect with, right? So maybe that's the ecosystem. So there are all these other ways that you can think about like building connections as you think about what roles you play within these movement spaces.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
So we're going to take maybe two more because I know that we've got a little bit longer. I appreciate your time, Alicia.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
So someone says, you talked about comfort in roles. Do you recommend stretching? Yes, absolutely recommend that. And
Yes.
what I would say, it's not about stretching into uncomfortable roles. I think it's about that if you've identified a role that you'd like to move into, right, that causes you some discomfort when you think about it, then that's good. I think that discomfort is where we learn the most, right? Where we can, as Alicia said earlier, take some risks, right, and experiment a little bit. And so you don't necessarily, so that's what I would suggest, that if you feel some discomfort about a role, that you explore it, right, and identify what are like a couple of steps you could take to experiment with that, or what can you learn from someone else who's playing that role currently, so that you're just building your knowledge, right, about what it means. So for example, for me, one of the roles that was actually, I would say uncomfortable and gave me discomfort was to actually be an executive director. That was, I felt like it was intimidating. It was really too difficult for me. I didn't have the skill set. I didn't know how to manage a budget of an organization. I didn't know how to like supervise people, right? I was more of a builder. Like I could build a program. I knew how to like, do that, right? I could get a project, right? Yeah. But to be an executive director, which also includes sometimes visioning, I felt really uncomfortable about. And so, but I did it, right? But I think that part of it was to kind of understand what the texture of the discomfort is, and where it is that you can maybe take some risks, and then feel it out. Like, is it making you feel even more uncomfortable? Well, that's a sign then, right? That maybe this is not right for me. Anything to add to that?
Yeah. So first of all, you know that everything you've just shared deeply resonates with me. Very similar experiences around stepping into kind of higher, more progressively more leadership within organizations or in spaces, and feeling really a lot of anxiety and a lot of nervousness about that. And so what some of the things that have helped me was, what do I need to learn to do this? Who do I need to talk to, right? Who has already done, I think that the Weaver part of this, like I'm really on the Weavers today, y'all. I'm just like big fan. Who are the Weavers, right? Like who can I connect with for like mentorship and support and feedback, and a mirror to my experience, that's been really helpful. And then like, I think the third thing that was really important for me was what have I been telling myself about my capacity or my capability, right? I feel like so much of how we come to leadership is through a really like Eurocentric, Western, white supremacist, masculine view of what leadership means, right? I know that that's not the only role that we're talking about, but it really helped me to understand what like authentic leadership looked like for me. And how to do that in a way that like embodies my queerness and my experience as a Black person in the world, right? So I think that part of it too was about shifting the narratives that I've been told about what leadership means or what a certain role means.
I love that.
Right. So like, what is my connection to that role, or my assumptions about that role that I've been told? And then the last thing that I'll share is that there are some roles that just won't work for some of us, right? I think about when I worked at a rape crisis center and folks came and they wanted to volunteer and were really clear, like, I'm a survivor and I don't want to do frontline work, right? I don't want to answer the hotline. It is too traumatic for me, right? I can't be a caregiver.
Yeah. I'm so glad that you're mentioning that. I think these are like really clear examples.
Yeah. There are some times where it's too triggering, it's too traumatic. Sometimes, as we're looking at for seeing the uprisings happening around the country in defense of Black life, I am still a Black person in the world, right? It is traumatic to me. I am traumatized, and many of us are. It is okay to not be on the front lines in this moment. It is okay to use different skills. So I think that there's a lot of things that we could be thinking about around like what roles feel right within certain contexts. And those are just kind of some of the things that I use to think about it.
I love that. I love it. And
Yeah.
I think that was such a clear example you gave too, because you're absolutely right. That you want to think about whether you have the capacity for it or not. And there's some roles, yeah, we're never going to fill. You know, I was just looking at the list while you were talking, and, you know, there are some roles that I don't know that I might be able to fill, right? One of the roles I'm trying to step back from is actually the disruptor role. I'm sorry, not that one. I like that one. The frontline responder role.
You like that one?
Yeah, I love this role. The frontline responder one has been, you know, for me in the wake of 9/11, in the wake of the Muslim ban, in the wake, you know, I have stepped into that quite a bit. And I've also realized that it takes a toll on me, you know? And so part of what I've asked my caregiver friends to do is to actually help me figure out when I feel the FOMO or like the drive to do that again, that I've asked them to ask me a couple of questions. Like, do you really need to do this? What are you bringing into the space, right? Can someone else do this?
Oh, girl.
Right? So like, and that has helped a lot because then I don't step in as much, right?
Yep.
So the last question that I want to take is this one that says, do you have advice for filling the missing roles in your ecosystem? How do you find and get connected to others? Thoughts on that?
Yeah. I have thoughts on that, but just, I have to say this because as you were talking about, like and friendships and relationships that really hold you accountable to caring for yourself in these hard moments, I was thinking about how, I was talking to my therapist the other day, and mentioned that I wanted to go to a protest or something, and I was feeling really guilty because I hadn't gone yet, or hadn't shown up in that specific way, even though I was doing other things like frontline responding through moving resources or other things, right? We take on all these different kinds of roles, and I know that. And yet I was feeling a lot of guilt. And so I said to my therapist, I said, you know, like, I think I should just go. And she said, how many people do you think are out there right now? And I was like, thousands of people are out there. And she said, do you think anyone will notice if you're not there? And it was so hurtful in the moment. I was like, how dare you? But it also was like a helpful, like, is this about FOMO? Was this about ego? It's just like really helpful to have people in your life who can like reflect back what you're saying to you, and like keep you really grounded. But it was very hurtful in the moment. I was like, I cannot believe I pay for this to be talked to like that.
Right. Yeah, but it sounds like she kind of knows how to ask the questions that you need to hear, right? And Absolutely. It is so rare to find people like that.
Totally.
But it brings me to this point that I really do feel that please think of the ecosystem beyond your work.
Yes.
Like, I think that would be very limiting, right? You can do this mapping exercise from the standpoint of an activist, right? And you can actually identify how is it that I'm constantly, consistently showing up? And in my example, as I've said, it was a frontline responder, recognizing there were no caregivers to kind of hold me, right? Like when I was feeling depleted and kind of like, I can't do this anymore, right? So really trying to make those shifts and fill in the missing roles is important. You fill in the missing roles in different ways. And Alicia, I don't know what you think about this, but when I think about it in just general, my life, I look for mentors, people who are guides, you know. I also look for people who are not necessarily always connected to my work. I have a lot of friends in my ecosystem that don't do the work that I do, but they are still people that that are important for my ecosystem and for me to thrive. I think also you can reach out to people who you don't know, that's also really important to be able to do that and say, hey, can I get some advice or input or whatever it is that you need? So I think those are different ways to fill out the missing roles. If you are talking from the standpoint of someone who's in a workplace where you have the ability to hire people, the ecosystem can help you, the mapping can help you figure out, in our workplace, we have, for example, a lot of builders, and I think actually Alicia started with this. We have a lot of builders, right? But we're building, but like to what end?
Yeah.
So maybe we need to identify and bring on and hire and recruit some people who have who are comfortable being visionaries, right? Because a lot of our workplaces are actually builder people, right? They're building the scaffolding, they're building the programming, but they're kind of in it. And so it helps to have some visionaries as well. And also some guides, right? And some weavers, going back to weavers. So it can also help you kind of identify that. The other way is if your workplace or you're mapping your workplace and you recognize that you're doing the same thing every year in the same way, and you're not getting to the middle circle of advancing your goal, then it might be a point in time to think about experimenters. Right? People who will take risks, who are ready to shake the status quo. Think about the work that you're doing, differently, like they say, out of the box thinking, right? Any thoughts on that? And then we're going to try to close it up. Although I could be on this with you for like hours, I think, Alicia.
I know, this is so fun, and there are so many good conversations happening in the chat, and
I know.
And people kind of revealing themselves as well, that it's just really fun, and I don't want to go. I know, just totally in agreement with everything you've said, particularly around building out your network, right? So again, I think that doing some personal mapping around like who you are and who is already in your network is really helpful. And as you're thinking about how you fill gaps, also continue to think about, does it bring you joy, right? Is it exploratory for you? Does it feel right? Is it traumatizing? Is it depleting, right? So as you continue to think about what you're building out in your networks, also just take care of yourself, I guess, is the point. Like, just please also consider how you take care of yourself in those moments.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that the ecosystem to me is also a way to think about how people can play different roles. Sometimes in our movement culture, it can get toxic at times, where there's this sense that one or two people speak for an entire movement, and they're the only people who can do it, and nobody else is allowed, right? Or this feeling that, cancel culture is so prevalent in a lot of the spaces that we work in, and it can be extremely depleting. And so thinking about the fact that people can play different roles and we can have a healthy and thriving ecosystem when we look at it like that, rather than in this narrow space of, it can only be like one visionary, one builder.
Yes.
Right? So really encourage people to also think about this as a way to bring people in. It is an inclusive framework rather than one that is trying to be siloed and exclusive, and to say, no, there's no more room at this table. No, build more, build the table out and chairs in, right? Set the table.
Exactly. Yeah, no, that feels so right to me. I mean, I think that what is so important, build and shift and transform our communities within the context of an ecosystem, that it really does take all of us. And that this care that we're trying to provide for one another is communal. It's actually sometimes not self-care, it's actually deeply communal care. And so I love the idea, right, that this ecosystem really does call us to be in community with one another, right? And that's the world that we want to see, right? That's the world that's the end, right? That's the North Star is like deep relationship with one another. I also think about the fact that Ella Baker said that strong movements don't need strong leaders, right? And so we don't all have to lead, right? We don't need strong leaders. What we need is a collective of people who are doing this work in a way that's complementary to one another. So thank you for that question.
Yeah, that's great. I love what you said too. I think that's we could do this, I think, longer.
Yeah.
But we both have to get on a call.
We do.
The same call.
There'll be more of this on the call, the next call.
Yeah. But we are so thankful to you all for being here. And I just want to end with some words and phrases that Alicia said that I have written down. Joy, impact, capacity, communal care, and ecosystem as a way of thinking of the ecosystem as a way of building community, right? And so I really want to stay with that. And then thank you for the person who put the link into the chat. It is at buildingmovement.org, all of it, the map, the roles description, and the reflection guide. You can also find it on my Medium page. You can get it at deepaviyer.org. Please use it for yourself, your ecosystems, your families, friends, network, whatever you want, your workplaces. And if you would like to adapt it, you can do that too. Really would love for you to make sure that you attributed it to us so that we can continue to keep it open source and get it out to as many people as possible. So thank you. Hi, Shivali. Hi. It's so great to see like all our friends here.
I know, it's so lovely.
Yeah. Well, thank you all. And if you think, if you want, this was going to be my last one, but I think folks might want some more of these Insta Lives. So maybe I'll do a couple more in July as well. And Alicia, I'm going to like bring you back as much as I can.
I would love that. This was so fun. Thank you for letting me share space with you and all of you who joined us today. That was super fun.
Thank you all. Take good care of yourselves. And thank you for how you're showing up in our world. We need you and appreciate you. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.